Hey guys, welcome back to Covenant Canon. As some of you may have noticed, Halo Divine Wind is now officially out. Written by the legendary Troy Denning as a follow-up to last year's Halo Shadows of Reach, and it serves as the third book in the Ferret series. The story follows Veta Lopez and her young team of Spartan 3s who have infiltrated the Keepers of the One Freedom for over 2 years and are now embroiled in a war on the Ark between the Spirit of Fire and the Banished, all the while trying to stop the Keepers and their zealous leader, Castor, from fulfilling what the Covenant failed to do: activate the Halos and begin the Great Journey. Today, I'll be going over the story of this book, though, like Shadows of Reach, I will be focusing on the Keepers, the Banished, and other focused story arcs in this book, which means we won't be focusing on Veta, the UNSC, or anything like that. And I'll also be pointing out all the cool Easter eggs that were in this book. I think this goes without saying, but a spoiler alert is now in effect. If you are either waiting for your copy of Divine Wind, in the middle of reading it, or just don't want to be spoiled in general, then I urge you all now to skip to the allotted time as shown for my general review of the novel. For everyone else though, this is Halo Divine Wind. The book picks up right after the end of Shadows of Reach, with Castor defecting from the Banished on Reach and taking Atriox's Lich, named Pagoras, through the Sith-space portal, with 40 Keepers of the One Freedom, including Enslan Gadogai, who was just forcibly recruited into the Keepers when the Ferrets threatened his life. And in this first chapter, we learn more about these human Keepers. They are apparently allied with the Doomsday cult, who call themselves the Humans of the Joyous Journey, who seem to be low standing within the UEG, strays, cafeteria managers, etc. It seems that desperate people within the UEG are drawn to even a Covenant remnant faction like the Keepers, and it's very intriguing that these Humans of the Joyous Journey share a similar belief in the Great Journey like the Keepers do. Now, as the Lich exits the entry portal at the Ark, the Keepers are caught in a three-way battle between the Spirit of Fire's forces, the Banished Defenders, and Covenant aircraft? You heard me correctly. For those of you who don't understand why they're Covenant on the Ark, it's revealed in Shadows of Reach's short story, Sacrifice, that Covenant loyalists who followed the Prophet of Truth in Halo 3 remained on the Forerunner Dreadnought 7 years after the event of Halo 3, and a Banished strike force had raided the ship and stolen Sith-space crystals, and now these loyalists were pissed off and wanted their crystals back. We also learned that, through Banished channels, that Let Valir has been left in command of the Banished war effort on the Ark. When I first read this, I was a bit surprised. He wasn't my first guess to be the commander of the Banished war effort after Atriox left. But it does make sense, seeing as he was Atriox's last true lieutenant on the Ark. Now, as the battle rages on at the portal site, Pagoras takes the brunt of the assault, and Veta and Gadogai manage to distract both the UNSC and the Banished as they crash landed in a canyon on the Ark. During this time, it's hinted that the Blade Master knows something's off with Veta and her brood. We're then cut away from the Keeper Ferret arc to the Banished, and here we're delighted to have the two main characters of Awakening the Nightmare returning, Pavium and Vordis. And let's just say these two are going through some grim times right now. After the events of Awakening the Nightmare, the Brothers clan, known as the Longshields, have lost Atriox's favor and have practically became the black sheep of the Banished. Can't say I'm surprised, seeing as they nearly jeopardized the Banished war effort by releasing the Flood, and now their troops are basically reduced to becoming reserve troops, while the other Banished fight at the portal site. Hell, even chieftains within the Longshields are challenging the Brothers' authority for such disgrace. Valir orders the Longshields to investigate the crash site, as he was quite suspicious of Gadogai's reports. Shifting back to the Keepers, as the survivors recover from the crash and prepare for the arrival of the Covenant, or worse, the Banished, they are suddenly attacked by a swarm of scratcher creatures called Kralladonk, hive-mind predators that can tear even a Jirohanai apart in seconds. As the ferrets and keepers were about to be overrun by these creatures, a salvo from a plasma cannon forces the swarm to disperse. But this shot came from a Covenant Phantom. 3 Covenant Phantoms, in fact. They offload a contingent of brute honor guards, led by none other than a prelate. This prelate was called Daz Bazvad. He was once the Prophet of Truth's personal assassin, and was left in command of the forces protecting the Dreadnought. Also, it seems that we got somewhat of an explanation of why we never saw any brute honor guards in Halo 3. They were simply guarding the Dreadnought. The Loyalists surround the Keepers, believing them to have the Slip Space Crystal, known to them as the Holy Light. Caster attempts to negotiate an alliance with Daz, as they share a similar spiritual belief in the Great Journey, but the prelate isn't convinced, seeing as they just came out of a banished lich. As the negotiations break down, they were then interrupted by an unlikely presence, Intrepid. Now, for those of you unaware, Intrepid was a forerunner Ancilla, determined to ensure humanity claimed the mantle of responsibility. And last time we saw her, she was trapped aboard the Argent Moon. But apparently, when Blue Team destroyed the station in Halo 5, she managed to attach herself to their Prowler, and somehow managed to infiltrate the Keepers as well. But when Cortana claimed the mantle through the domain and initiates the created uprising, Intrepid wants the Keepers to activate the Halos, as it would damage the domain and thwart Cortana, whom she calls Usurper, and vows to help humanity once the galaxy is reseeded again. Now, Intrepid, having dispersed herself in any piece of equipment she could find, took the role as the Oracle, and guided both the Loyalists and the Keepers into an alliance. This alliance is tense, to say the least, but the Oracle managed to get the groups to cooperate, and they depart to make way to one of the Ark's cartographers, for they now must find a new citadel to activate the Halos, as the one in Halo 3 was rendered inoperable. Along the way, Caster fills Daz in on the status of the Jirohanai in the post-war era, and here we get an awesome name drop on Lydas and Akabe from Escalation and Envoy respectively. It's always nice to have these name drops from other media. I just love it. And here we get some interesting info from the Dokab and the Prelate. Apparently, during the events of the Great Schism, Caster was fighting on Mars and had no idea that there were other San Shayum survivors after the fall of High Charity. But the Prelate reveals that the prophets are in fact living in seclusion on a shield world known as Cloister. And we learn later on that this is because the San Shayum want to retake the galaxy once the Halos were activated. This could explain why Truth was so adamant on activating the Halos in Halo 3, despite the fact that he knows that they won't achieve divinity. Truth probably wanted to activate the Halos just so the San Shayum could control the galaxy once again, and shield worlds were able to counter the effects of the Halos. Unbeknownst to Caster and Daz, Veta was eavesdropping on the whole exchange. Jumping back to the Banished, Pavium and Vordis arrive at the Lich's crash site, and after clearing the area of the Scratcher creatures, they discover through a secret note left by Veta that Caster intends on activating the Halos with the Covenant's help. The brothers now have a new objective: thwart the Covenant Keeper Alliance, stop them from activating the Halos, and regain their respect among the Banished. Now, when the Covenant Phantoms arrive near the cartographer, the ferrets stir up a mini brawl with the Covenant and Keepers, all the while signaling a nearby pelican. After Caster and Daz control the situation, them, the Blade Master, and Veda take a complement of Ghost to the cartographer. Along the way, the Blade Master is considering whether or not they are actually fervent believers in the Keepers, or in fact, only spies, and he also contemplates whether or not to kill them or help them. And here we get a bit of Gadugai's background. In a former life, he was Azil Lamul of the Mole clan, a powerful house in the 17 Keeps, a Navarro state, on the Sangheili colony world of Sempulkal. For those of you unaware, Sempulkal, or Joyous Exaltation in English, was the stronghold of Zaitanjar Watinri's Covenant forces during the events of Ghost of Onyx, until it was atomized in a Nova Bomb explosion, one caused by a couple Hurgoks and a grunt of all things. But I must say, this is a great Easter egg for those of you who have read Ghost of Onyx, myself included. Anyway, Azil was the firstborn son of the matriarch of his keep, and was mentored by the Kaidan of his keep, destined to one day be Kaidan himself. While traveling to the clan keeps of Varro to gather support in his bid to become Kaidan, he enters a secret relationship with a female by the name of Obolasi. Upon his return, the clan elders named Lamul the next Kaidan as expected, and also chosen another female to be his wife, a female by the name of Unavaru, niece of the Marshal of Varro. But when Azil refused, the Marshal had his entire family killed and Azil was imprisoned. All the while, the Marshal marries off his beloved wife to one of his relatives, who also becomes the Kaidan of the Mole clan. He was warned that if he ever retaliate, his love would be the first to die. So he never did. He vented his anger on the humans during the Covenant War, which was called by the Covenant as the War of Annihilation. During this time, he was recruited by the Silent Shadow and renounced his old life and took on the name Inslan Gadugai. All in all, I really loved the story of the Blade Master. So much rich lore in Sangheili politics. I'll be sure to make a separate video on that soon. But back to business. As the group proceeds within the cartographer, both Inslan and Daz grow suspicious of Veda, as she took her time to access the facility, and after being vetted through numerous submonitors, they discover the new citadel, a frozen facility called Epsilon Clarion. But all of a sudden, Banished Longshields attack in force, killing numerous Covenant and Keepers, forcing them to retreat in all but one of their phantoms. While fleeing from the Longshields and the Phantom, Intrepid Eye reveals to the Dokab that Veda and her brood are in fact only spies, intent on destroying the Keepers. Caster was enraged by this revelation, but before he could act on his rage, the Prelate and Blade Master arranged for the ferrets to be lured in a false staging area to be cut down by the Banished, and have the Banished be destroyed by local Covenant fighters. The Banished Longshields, led by Pavium and Vortis in the meantime, intercept the false transmission from Daz, falling directly into the Prelate's hands. When Veda and the ferrets arrived at the coordinates Caster gave them, known as the Long Ponds, the Oni spies deduced that their cover had been blown, and signaled the Pelican that had been tracking them for extraction. The spies then ambushed Caster and the Prelate, killing many in their track, including a human keeper, and wounding the Dokab. Then the Pelican arrives timely and rescues the ferrets. After some time, Pavium and Vortis, aboard their Phantom, managed to deal with their pursuers, a pair of Covenant aircraft. After clearing the airspace, the brothers intercept a UNSC transmission with coordinates to the new citadel. Vortis believes this to be a ploy, but Pavium decides to take the bait regardless. This way, Pavium hopes to deal with Castor and his Covenant allies, preventing them from activating Halo and redeeming the long shields in the eyes of the Banished. While en route to the Citadel, Castor's group arrived to find the long shields gathering near Epsilon Clarion. While in a debate on how to deal with the Banished, Intrepid Eye reveals that she has been in contact with the Submonitor and has gained access to the Sentinels. Then, the battle for the Epsilon Clarion commences. During this time, the ferrets arrive to kill the last human keeper so Veda can be taken instead, as a last resort to kill Intrepid Eye and stop the keepers. She succeeds in killing the last human keeper, and the Blade Master captures Veda. All the while, the ferrets and the Banished separately finish off most of the Covenant and Keepers, with only Castor, Gadogai, Krellis, the prelate, and his second in command, Arcus. But when all seemed lost, Intrepid Eye deploys the Sentinels to delay their enemies as they enter the Citadel. It was during this time that Castor discovered that his old war brother's son had relayed information to the prelate. Seeing this as a betrayal to one so faithful, Castor nearly killed Krellis. But just before the Dokab indulged in his impulse, the young Captain Deacon shielded him as the ferrets opened fire on the group. Castor then weeps and forgives the son of his old war brother, as he assigns this crippled Jirohanai to defend him while initiating the Great Journey. Then, Pavium and Vortis enter the facility and engage Daz and Arcus in combat. The two Covenant loyalists manage to knock the Longshield brothers out of the building, but just as they manage to get Veda to open the control room, Castor learns the true nature of the Halos through the Submonitor of the Citadel, just as the ferrets move to thwart him. Having endured enormous losses, betrayal after betrayal, and learning that the very faith he believed in for most of his life was a lie, Castor broke his alliance with the prelate, and Gadogai took his energy glaive and threw the Sanshayum to the chasm beneath the Citadel. Without any faith to lean on, the former Dokab relied on one thing now: revenge. Revenge on Veda and her ferrets for deceiving him. But just as he was gonna get that chance, the Spirit of Fire bombards the Citadel, and the two groups race out as Epsilon Clarion is reduced to a crater, and Intrepid Eye is finally destroyed. Having been the last two Longshields, Pavium and Vortis recall their total losses, and how they intend on informing Valir that they helped in preventing the firing of the Halos. This way they could claim some of the credit, if not all the glory. Then, they spot Daz Bazvad, having survived the bombardment, snapping the neck of Mark, one of the ferret infiltrators. Castor and Gadogai also managed to make out of the Citadel before it was destroyed, and the former Dokab vows to kill all who had wronged him, once and for all. And that's Halo Divine Wind. All in all, it was a fantastic read. Even with the perspectives of Veda Lopez and her ferrets, Divine Wind was heavy with Keeper, Banished, and Covenant perspectives. This was definitely a much needed change of pace from the human-dominated narratives in the past few years. And being on the Ark again is always a welcome setting in my eyes. And there are actually some big reveals that I chose not to include in the spoiler part of this video. The biggest reveal from this book is that there are humans in the Banished, more specifically in the Longshield clan. This was a sigh of relief, as most people, myself included, were scratching their heads on why Aatrox was now hating humans. But we should remember, the Banished is a confederacy of pirates and mercenaries and warlords. and some clans within the Banished can accept humans into their ranks, while others like Escherun's Force or the Ravaged Tusk, for example, choose not to employ them. But as I said, the Longshields have employed humans in their ranks, but after numerous defections, Pavium decided to purge them out of the Longshields. And by purge, I mean kill, much to the annoyance of Atriox, as he saw them as useful. Another small detail that I enjoyed is the Silent Shadow discarding their old names and adopting new ones. Makes sense for an order of assassins like the Silent Shadow. They don't want anyone to know their backgrounds. If they did, they would kill them. And lastly, Daz Bozvod apparently fought Spartans during the war, which in his experience was in fact intoxicating. I wonder if the UNSC ever identified a prelate during the Covenant War, seeing as the ferrets knew very well what Daz was when they first met him early on in the book. But as to my final review, Troy Denning never fails to make a great Halo novel. The book has intense and brilliant storytelling, all the while expanding the lore behind the Keepers, the Covenant, and the Banished. It delivers some heartwarming moments and some heartbreaking events. And so, after careful consideration, I give Divine Wind an 8.5 out of 10. I highly recommend that you guys grab this book at your nearest bookstore and give it a binge read. I promise you won't be disappointed if you enjoyed Dunning's other Halo novels. But what do you guys think of Divine Wind? Who was your favorite character? What was your favorite part? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, guys, may Atriox's eyes watch down upon you all.